And with that, hello, welcome everyone to our final presentation for 2021 in the Community Gardening Around the Village series. I'm Mark Pinto here with you from Phoenixville Public Library, and I'd like to acknowledge our series partners: Phoenixville Communities That Care, Phoenixville Recreation Department, Phoenixville Area Transition Living Landscape, Penn State Extension, Camphill, Kimberton Hills, Phoenixville Hospital, Trellis for Tomorrow, and the Chester County Food Bank. Thank you all for making this series possible and continue for as long as it's been more than a year now, a year and a couple of months. Tonight we'll learn about using native plants in our holiday celebrations with Teresa J. Avery. She's a Master Watershed Steward in Chester County for the Penn State Extension. Feel free to unmute yourself during her presentation to ask her any questions. Teresa, great to have you here with us tonight. Take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Everyone, just like Mark said, if you, and I'm hoping that you will, have a conversation with me tonight about native plants and holiday festivities. As I told Mark earlier, I am not great at keeping an eye on the chat, so he's going to do that for me. If you'd prefer to put your comments in the chat, he'll read them out, but it'd be great for me if you want to say something and get involved, please just unmute. If you want to turn on your video so I can see your face, I would sure appreciate that. That'd be wonderful. But I also understand maybe, we're wearing the pajamas already or whatever. That's fine too. So today we're going to talk about native plants and holiday festivities, but I want to start by just sharing. There we go. There we go. There's always a little AV problem as we get started. A little bit about how I come to you today. As Mark said, I am a member of Penn State Extension's Master Watershed Steward program. So a lot of people will ask, what the heck is a Master Watershed Steward? Well, this program was established to educate and empower volunteers to protect environmental resources, both here in Chester County and around the state. So this is a statewide program. As a Master Watershed Steward volunteer, we attend several months of training on a range of environmental topics, primarily centered around water and the importance of water in our ecosystems, to our communities, and to both plants and animals in our ecosystem. So we're always looking for volunteers that are passionate about the environment, supporting our communities, and you do 40 hours of training. And then each year after that, you do 50 hours of volunteer service. And that volunteer service can range anywhere from, you can see the ladies and gentlemen in this picture here are planting native plants near a riparian buffer. So you can go out and do things like that, plant rain gardens, really get your hands in the dirt. Or you can do educational pieces like I'm doing for you tonight. You can help with water quality monitoring, working with animals, and so there's any number of volunteer opportunities with the Master Watershed Stewards program. So if you'd like to learn more, this is the website that you can look at to learn more about Master Watershed Steward program, again with Penn State Extension. And I'll provide my email at the end if you'd like to ask any questions of me about the program after tonight's presentation. So let's get started. So I said we were going to talk about native plants in holiday decor. So I think it's important that we start and ask, what is a native plant? And I think, it's appropriate, the two pictures that we have here, and I'll share why. But first, I'd like to know from all of you, how would you describe what is a native plant? Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
Is it a plant that is grown in a particular area naturally and not brought in?
Yeah, Ruth, that's a great definition. A plant that's grown in an area naturally and not brought in. Does anybody have an idea what two plants we're looking at here?
Milkweed.
Yep. Anybody know the one on the right? It's a little unusual version of the plant on the right. So now on the milkweed, bonus points for what kind of milkweed that is.
Swamp milkweed.
Perfect, Cindy. You are absolutely right. That is the common or swamp milkweed. The plant on the left is a buddleia. That is a butterfly bush. It's a little bit of an unusual variety of a butterfly bush, so it isn't, I will admit, readily apparent. It's not the one that a lot of us may have in our landscapes. But what you see here, just as Ruth said, is that milkweed on the left. That is a plant that occurs naturally here in eastern Pennsylvania and indeed up and down the east coast of the United States. The plants, the insects that we have here in this area have evolved alongside that plant over thousands and thousands of years of evolution. The plant on the right is a buddleia that is not native to Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful plant. And as it's called a butterfly bush, we look at it to bring butterflies into our gardens, and it is the cornerstone of a lot of beautiful garden displays. It is not, however, native. So our insects, like the monarch and other butterflies, actually do have a harder time using this plant for food. They did not evolve together. And so that's kind of the difference between, you know, an ornamental plant and a native plant when we talk about our landscapes. So I think many of you, how many of you have heard of Dr. Doug Ptolemy? Just by maybe a show of virtual hands there, you see at the bottom of your screen, the raise your hand function. Has anybody heard of Dr. Doug Ptolemy? Okay, Mark, Marilyn, yeah. So a few of you have. So Dr. Ptolemy is a professor at the University of Delaware, and he has really been on the leading edge of sharing the importance of native plants in landscapes and how we can use native plantings to help our entire ecosystem just through what we plant in our backyard. So I promise you tonight, this is the only video we're going to watch. I did not put together an hour's worth of videos for you, I promise. But I thought as long as we're going to talk about native plants, we probably better let Dr. Ptolemy have a word, because he certainly is sort of the leading voice in the area when it comes to native plants. So this is just about a 4-minute video. Mark, if you can't hear the video, would you please give me a high sign?
Animals. Absolutely every animal on this planet gets its food directly from plants. Gets its food either by eating a plant or by eating something else that ate the plant. And that's because plants are the only organisms that can capture the sun's energy and turn it into food. The most important group of animals that take energy from plants and pass it to other animals are the insects that eat plants. We'll call them insect herbivores. And most insect herbivores are only able to eat a particular group of plants. And we call that specialization. They can only eat the plants that they have co-evolved with, because plants defend themselves with nasty chemicals, and it takes long periods of time for insects to develop the physiological ability to digest those chemicals. When we create a meadow, we are in effect restoring an ancient food web. This works best if we use the native plants that were originally part of that food web. We'd like to favor native plants because the insect herbivores that evolved where you want to put your meadow evolved in concert with those native plants. They have specialized on those native plants over many, many thousands of years, which have enabled those insects to eat them. Those same insects have no evolutionary exposure to plants that evolved in China or Europe. They won't be able to eat these plants. They won't be able to digest them. They won't even recognize them as food plants. So if you're creating a meadow, choose plants that are native to your area, the country. A good example of an insect that specializes on one group of plants because of that plant's chemistry is our friend the monarch butterfly. It eats milkweeds and nothing else because it's able to break down the nasty chemicals that are in milkweeds, but it's unable to digest any other type of plant. If we cut milkweeds down then, monarch larvae cannot crawl off and eat some other type of plant. So if we destroy the plants that these insect herbivores have specialized on, they will have nothing to eat and will be doomed to extinction. So stop and think about it. So many animals depend on insects for their food. All amphibians, for example, eat insects. So do many reptiles and rodents. And 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects. If we replace our native plants with non-native plants, then all of those animals won't have enough to eat. And that'll hit biodiversity very hard. And of course, that's exactly what we've done by creating lawns and landscaping with non-native plants that evolved outside of our local ecosystems. So remember what a meadow is all about. It's not just a beautiful place, but it's a place where things can live. Living things have two requirements. They need food and they need a place to live. Your meadow provides both. It provides food because of the plants that you put in your meadow. And if you put many different types of plants in your meadow, you'll have a diversity of food for a diversity of insects, and you'll have a diversity of natural enemies that will eat those insects. And the meadow provides habitat, hiding places, those little niches where the birds and the other meadow creatures can nest and rear their young. Planting a native wildflower meadow is so much more beautiful and dynamic, both structurally and in terms of species, than planting a monoculture such as a lawn. Somebody once said that gardening is a way of showing that you believe in tomorrow. And I think that's never been more true than today, because the way we garden, the way we create places like meadows, is going to determine what life looks like tomorrow.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you just a little taste of some ideas why planting native plants might be a good idea just to think about when you're planting new plants into your garden or into your landscape here in Eastern Pennsylvania. But today, of course, we're specifically talking about how those native plants can beautify our homes for our holiday decor. And I want you to think about tonight, I mean, I love going to Michael's as much as the next guy, and craft stores and seeing all the stuff and buying swags and wreaths. But sometimes the most beautiful holiday decor can actually be found right outside your door. And of course, the value of this is not only saving a little bit of money by going with plants that you can find right outside, you don't have to pay for them, but you're also going to get out in nature, maybe spend some time with your family, with the little ones, go out and have a good walk. And while you're having the walk, collect some beautiful things for your holiday decor. And so tonight I'm going to try and share with you just some ideas you might not have thought of in using those native plants. Now, looking at that, using native plants, this really is a tradition in the United States. I mean, frankly, using native plants and cultivated plants in holiday decor has been a tradition in the United States since colonial days. It appears to have started in the southern United States and moved north from there. And of course, in colonial Williamsburg, they're still to this day having competitions. As you can see, obviously from this color photo, this is a modern photo of a door in colonial Williamsburg. But look at all that evergreen that they've used, the sheaths of wheat, dried grasses, dried vines that they have found out in the garden, and those holly berries, and really making that lovely design all out of plants. So definitely a part of tradition around the United States that's come through to the modern day. When you're using plants in decoration, you do want to be careful how you do it, because just like if you bring in, a cut Christmas tree and you don't put it in water, an improperly prepared plant can be a fire hazard. So when you're cutting plants or when you're bringing plants inside, try to think about the ones that are going to retain the moisture longer, like your evergreens. This is, one of the reasons evergreens are so popular in decor, right, is because they hold on to the moisture, they don't dry out, they don't get brown as easily, and they don't become a fire hazard as easily. When you are cutting plants, use your pruning shears. You get a nice sharp cut, and the likelihood is you're not introducing any bacteria or anything like that into the cutting. And use fresh plants, and then don't put them under the sun or put them heat sources. Just think about the ways that they could dry out in your home. So for example, if you're making, let's say, a garland or swag, it might look beautiful over your fireplace hanging from your mantle, but of course the heat from the fireplace is going to dry those cuttings out. So you really want to think about where you're placing plants and keep them away from heat sources, light sources that are going to bleach out the color also. So not only do they get too dry, but then they're also not going to look as good. Now, This next tip I took from this source here, homesteading.com, and I had not heard it before, but I thought I would share it with you all. And then maybe if you try it, you'll let me know. But it suggested to crush the base of woody stems to better absorb water. Hadn't heard it before. Certainly soak fresh plant pieces in water overnight. That one we've heard before, but the crushing of the stems I hadn't heard. So that was a suggestion to help get water up into the cutting before you place it into the piece of decor. And of course, you want to keep an eye on decor pieces and make sure you replace the dried up plants, both for fire reasons and of course for how they look. And there are products called an anti-transparent. And this, this is nothing, it sounds very, fancy and everything. And you can find this at garden stores. You might be able to find it at Michael too. It's something you spray on the decor pieces, and it reduces the amount of moisture that is lost out of the plant during the day, throughout the day. So it doesn't mean that they'll stay soft and full of moisture forever, but it will slow out the rate at which they dry out. So that's something that you can think about, particularly if you're using lower moisture plants in your decor pieces. Now, when you're thinking about what you're going to use inside your house, the temptation, of course, is to go with greenery because it's everywhere. There's all kinds of different pine trees and evergreen trees and all sorts of things, and it's so pretty. But think about the different plants and the different textures and colors that you're going to see out in the landscapes when you start walking around. Here we see an evergreen that has these beautiful blue little buds on it. And doesn't that look pretty? When you're trimming, if you're going to trim out in a landscape, trim carefully with consideration for the living plant, because you may get all excited. Oh, look at what I found for my holiday decor. But of course, that plant has a life beyond your holiday decor. So you want to make sure you think about where you're taking it from, how you're pruning it, and what the living plant is going to look like when you're done. Now, we don't want to be cutting plants from public lands without permission. Okay, so definitely do not go out into the local park, for example, and start cutting up the plants. Folks will not be happy about that. And certainly also, you never want to cut plants without permission from private lands. So even if there is the most beautiful red twig dogwood in the world in your neighbor's landscape, don't go out and cut it without permission. I hope you're all laughing because I'm just trying to make a funny point here that we want to be careful and considerate of everyone as we're looking for cuttings and we're looking for things for our decor. Okay. And of course, we always want to use our plants safely. So you think about, for example, if you're bringing holly berries into the house, or you're bringing something with a berry or an acorn, some leaves and berries can be poisonous and they may drop off your decor even as they dry or even when they're still moist. And so those things can be picked up by kids and by pets. And so you want to make sure that you're just being very aware of what you're bringing into your house and keep anything falling picked up right away. Some plants can be prickly, of course, and they can be even more prickly when they dry out. So, just people don't like to be scratched at the dinner table, for example, if you're using that as a centerpiece. So be mindful of that. Now, when you do your decor, some things, you might take some creative license with. You might use some glitter, or you might use some glue or an anti-transparent or some paint. You might put some yarn on it. Remember that if you are composting, and good for you if you're composting, because it takes a lot of work and dedication, and it's a great thing to do, but you do not want to put anything in your compost that has of a chemical nature. So any of those glues, paints, anti-transparents, anything like that, do not compost those items. Unfortunately, those decor pieces, when they're done being used, will need to go in the trash, not in the compost, because you don't want to mess up your whole compost pile with those chemicals. So now I want to talk, and please don't hesitate, folks, if you have any questions. I love hearing from other people. I can talk a mile a minute. So if you don't ask any questions, I just keep going, but don't hesitate to call out if you have questions. I just want to go through a few plants that we might consider as we think about using native plants in holiday decor. Now, this one, you're all thinking, of course, mistletoe, of course. But did you know that mistletoe is a native plant? It comes out of New Jersey and across the eastern United States. It's actually native to a great section of the United States, and it is parasitic. I did not know this. It gets part of its energy from its host plants. So if you look up into the trees, you may see some mistletoe high up in the trees, and that is actually taking its energy from both the tree that it is attached to, as well as the sun and water that other plants get their energy from. So the unassuming little mistletoe that we see at all holiday gatherings can indeed be considered a native plant in your holiday decor. Now, how did it come to be so popular in holiday decorations? Well, there are lots of websites that you can read all about mistletoe and the myths, but I'll leave it here to say that it is associated with fertility in ancient myth and legend. So I'll let you read more about that on your own, but that is how mistletoe has a long history with all sorts of celebrations and sort of rites of passage in European, particularly history, but it is here with us in the United States as a native plant. Now, I don't know how many you're going to actually find out there in the woods, but if you're looking for them, look up into the high branches, and you never know, you might see a few, but you might do better to go to your local plant store to purchase this one, but you'll know when you get it that it is a native plant. Now, pine cones are another great thing for your holiday decor. And just again, you're only limited on pine cones by the depth of your own imagination. And of course, in Pennsylvania, we have many, many native pine trees. So I want you to look at the bottom of the slide here. I have a website there that you can go and learn about Pennsylvania's native pine trees. When you're out walking in the woods here in Pennsylvania, you are going to find pine cones that are big and strong, like the ones you see in the centerpiece picture there. And you're also going to find pine cones that are small, only about this small, and papery, and how these things look different in different pieces of holiday decor. So if we look over the left there, we see that you can do scented, and that gives you a little bit of an idea how to do scented cones. Now, I had not found this before, this suggestion that on a lined baking sheet, you bake at 230 degrees Fahrenheit for about 30 minutes to remove bugs and get the cones to open up. So, keep an eye on them. Don't leave them in the oven and forget them or, anything. Be careful. But this was a suggestion that I found about how to get those cones to open up, because if they're closed when you find them, then maybe you want them to open up to put little things inside or paint the edges of the pine cones themselves. Of course, you can use them for centerpieces, for wreaths. There is no end to things we can do with the natural pine cones that we find out in the woods and out in our landscapes here in Pennsylvania. And right alongside those pine cones, you're going to see a lot of acorns. I have a website there about Pennsylvania hardwood trees. And, so you can read there about all the different hardwood trees that we have here in Pennsylvania, including those acorn bearing oak trees that we have all over the place in great variety. Now, I love this image that I've shamelessly stolen all these images, of course, online, and I've tried to give credit and tell you where to find those images throughout the presentation. But I just love this particular one from Decoratorist, because look how they turned the caps of the acorns upside down and then painted them to make this beautiful ornament. I mean, how creative is that? And again, the only thing they've used there are acorns you could find outside, a little paint and glue, a ribbon and a piece of baling twine, and their own creativity. So there's just no end of things that you can do with the acorns. Here's some more ideas, just again, that breadth of imagination. Paint, you can use either sparkly paint and making ornaments. This is all from Etsy.com, so you could go on and buy these things if you wanted, but I'm suggesting that we enjoy some holiday festivities by finding the acorns and then doing things with them on our own. So here on the bottom right, you see having made candles and putting them into the candles with cranberries and evergreens, painting them and making centerpieces out of them. But the humble acorn becomes a real powerhouse of decoration at this time of year, and very, very easily found here in Pennsylvania. Now, the top right photo, I again shamelessly stole, and I would like to say I shamelessly stole this one from the Master Gardeners of Penn State Extension. They had this posted on their website, and I just thought this was a great reminder that, you know, the leaves that you find outside, if your neighborhood hasn't completely cleaned up every one of its leaves, you can find some oak leaves and all sorts of sycamore leaves and all sorts of different leaves with different shapes. They may still have some color to them. They may have some yellow or red or different shades of brown or even a little bit of green. If you're lucky, you may find some this time of year still with a little bit of green on them. But those leaves can come together to make beautiful centerpieces, be put together with pine cones and acorns and other native plants. Now, of course, you may find some leaves that aren't of native plants. There's going to be ornamental trees out there that have dropped their beautiful leaves too. And that's okay. You know, we don't have to be too religious about there being native plants, but you can just use those leaves and make some beautiful decor with the leaves that you're going to find outside on your walks in the Pennsylvania woods. Now, I think probably all of you know where the left and bottom photo here come from, and that is from Longwood Gardens. So I happened to have been at the Longwood Christmas lights the other night, and I was about 2/3 of the way through the conservatory when I realized I am giving a presentation on holiday decor and native plants, and I haven't taken a single picture. So I was not at the top of my game, but on my way through the conservatory, I snapped a couple of things here just to give you an idea how Longwood has used some of these native plants. If you look on the left, that is sort of a big, almost a topiary. I didn't take a picture of the whole thing, but showing, you know, they have yellow painted or gold painted pine cones there. They have ones that are dipped to look like snow. Then they have the evergreens with some dipping to look like snow and all accenting each other. And then if you look at the bottom right photo, that is a dinner table, and of course decorated in Longwood holiday style. But what fascinated me was how they had put, instead of a table runner, they had a dowel across about 3 feet or more above the top of the table, and had that runner across the top heavily decorated with hollyberry and evergreens and some dried grasses to make that incredible effect with then the lights hanging down from it. So again, using those native plants, using a mixture of texture and color, and in a surprising way, and up in the air instead of being a runner down on the table. So again, only your imagination is in the way of your using these materials that we find out in nature. So here's another plant that is native to our landscapes here in Pennsylvania that can be a great choice for your holiday decor. And you can buy this plant this time of year. You can buy fake versions of this plant all over Michael's, but you know, what fun is it to go out and find it or to plant it in your own landscape so that you can take cuttings from it year after year. And this is the winterberry holly. The berries of this bush are eaten by more than 48 species of birds. So when you plant it, not only are you going to get a great piece of holiday decor for the winter, but you're going to attract more birds to your yard during the spring and summer as well. In the fall, the leaves of this plant drop, and that's when you get this bright red display that gives you this beautiful contrast in holiday decor. Now, one other thing about this live plant in the landscape that I know I love. Now, I live down in Kennett Township, so not quite to the Delaware border. I don't know how it is up north there in Phoenixville, but here, the deer are just the scourge of every gardener's life, and everything I try to plant, the deer just browse away at it, and by come spring, I've got nothing left. Well, the winterberry holly, I make no promises. They are deer, of course, so that you can't predict what they're going to do, but they do tend to leave the living plant of the winterberry holly alone. This is not a plant that deer like to get into. So you do have a better than average chance with this plant that they're going to leave it alone, and it's still going to be a beautiful plant come spring when it starts to get its leaves back. So the winterberry holly, great choice for your landscape. And then a few years after you put it in, you're going to have some great Christmas cuttings. And because it is a native, you may find it out there walking in the woods to use in your holiday decor. Another plant that some folks might not think about, but it is a native and it is fascinating in both the landscape and in decor, and that is the red twig dogwood. So I was saying earlier, I said to Mark that, we're going to try and make snow not so scary. If we're going to get snow on Wednesday, let's think about the beautiful contrast that we get out in the landscape between snow and the winterberry holly, and between snow and the red twig dogwood like we see here. Now, the red twig dogwood, if you have not encountered this plant before, it does not have a tree habit like a lot of the dogwoods we think of. When you say dogwood, we tend to think of beautiful white flowers on a graceful small tree, but the red twig dogwood has a bushing habit. So it's something that can be planted either as a single bush, or it can be made into a hedgerow of sorts like we see here. Now, they do like to have their feet wet, so you are going to find them, or if you're going to plant them, you're going to want to put them down on stream banks, by ponds, and in slightly marshy areas. So you're not going to want to put them in sandy soil or in clay soils. But they really make this beautiful contrast against the background of snow and those bright red branches. When everything else in the landscape is kind of dark and dreary, there stands the red twig dogwood, bright and red. And you can imagine some of the things you can do with those red twig dogwood twigs in your holiday decor. Now, if you go to, and I'm sorry to keep picking on Michael's, that's just the craft store I'm most familiar with. But if you go to Michael's now, you're going to probably find a lot of dyed red twigs, but they most often are going to be dyed. They probably aren't going to be natural red twig dogwood, most likely. But you can really use that, make those big red bundles like you see there. There's such a beautiful contrast against evergreen, the common, how many evergreen we have in our holiday decor. Or look at this wreath made by twisting red twigs to just, again, make that contrast. And the same with the wreath below that, the contrast in textures between the evergreen, the raffia bow, the twisted twigs, and then the contrast in colors again. So that's using all the red twig dogwood, which can be found out in our landscapes here in Pennsylvania. And then the last plant I want to share with you today is the yellow twig dogwood. Now, this is one you may not find just out in the woods walking around, because it is a cultivar of the red twig. And yellow isn't traditionally a holiday color, but just wow. I mean, can you imagine, how you would braid that in maybe among red twigs, or braid it in with your evergreens, or have bunches of this in your holiday decor around your house. And so you can have that just by planting this yellow twig dogwood in your yard. And, a few years later, you're going to have a strong enough plant to where you can have your cuttings for your holiday decor, and the deer are not going to be browsing too heavily on this one either. It tends to do pretty well in the landscape, and just a very unusual plant that is a native here to Pennsylvania. So those are the plants that I wanted to share with you tonight. Let me take a stop for a second. Does anybody have any questions? Mark, I see there's some things in the chat, but I haven't opened it up.
Yeah, there's one comment earlier in the chat about being careful with toxic plants, including mistletoe, and also plants and berries that are toxic to pets.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said early on, you do want to have an awareness of the plants that you're bringing in, making sure that you're not exposing children in your household or pets to something that's going to make them sick. And for sure, no matter what kind of plant it is, if things drop off your decor, you just want to pick them up. If it gets dry and it starts to crack, particularly like leaves, if they get too dry, they can really almost become dusty. You want to pick that up to try to keep everybody in your household safe, for sure.
Feel free to unmute, or if you'd prefer, you can type your question or comment in the chat.
Well, I'm afraid I am coming to the end of my remarks. I'm a little bit faster than I thought, but you guys were a quiet and attentive group tonight. So I just want to leave you with the thought that, again, the most beautiful holiday decor can be found right outside your door. And it's a great opportunity to go on and take a walk in the woods. Not only can you enjoy your time walking through the Pennsylvania landscape, but make it a time to remember with your family, with the little ones in your life. Make it an opportunity to instill a love of nature in the children around you. It's just a great opportunity. And then make those memories of making those pieces of holiday decor yourself instead of going to Michael's. I'll take a last jab at Michael's here as we finish up the presentation. So if you want to learn more about the Master Watershed Steward program, again, here's that link. And in this presentation, I understand from Mark, it'll be up on YouTube. I wanted to make sure you had a chance to see some resources, some places where you can read more about native plants and holiday decor, about native plants in our landscape and why native plants matter. So there's some more things here. Mark, any other questions pop up there?
Yep, someone wants to know what your favorite option is for decorating.
Well, I'll admit I fall back on the evergreens. They're so easy to go out and find. But I just really love the little acorns. I know this makes me a little crazy. You guys are all probably thinking I'm insane, but there's just so many things you can do with them. Their little caps come off and you can make ornaments. You can make little stick figures. You can use just sticks. And then the acorn is the hat and make little guys. And it's such fun with kids. Kids are just endlessly fascinated by that kind of creativity. And I just love doing things like that.
More than meets the eye with them, yes, is a comment about that.
Yeah, and take some time to go online, Pinterest, Etsy, and see what other people are doing that sparks your creativity as well. Not all of us, I know I spend most of my day at a computer and that can kind of suck the craft ideas right out of me. But then you get online and look at other things people are doing and kind of really get the ideas flowing.
Any other comments, questions for Teresa?
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. And I look forward someday perhaps to seeing you actually in person up at Phoenixville Library. I hope I'll get that opportunity.
We will we'll pencil that in. Thanks, Teresa, for making it's such a fun and engaging program for everyone tonight.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Cindy. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Happy holidays and good night.
Good night. Thanks, Mark.